All right. So welcome once again, everyone. This is to celebrate 100 issues of the Varta webzine. We will talk more about how these 100 issues came about, different issues around it as we go along. But first, I would like to hand over the reins of this meeting to Dr. Kaustav Bakshi, who has been a regular contributor to the webzine and with whom I have shared a lot of conversations, ideas about issues that need to be written about, issues that need to be talked about, some of which we have so far covered in Varta. So without delay, Kaustav, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Pavan. And it's really like congratulations to you, like 100th issue. And yes, Varta has been a part and parcel of our lives for the last like now 9 years almost.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I'm like deeply honored to be invited to chair today's session. And some of my esteemed colleagues are here on the panel, our fellow activists who have been publishing with Varta, enlightening us in so many different ways. But before I start the panel today, like I would like to take a moment and remember that very iconic Urvashi Ved, who we lost, just 14 days ago on the 14th of May. And as we know that Urvashi, actually, because she came to the scene and she became so popular in the 90s. In fact, she was quite a trailblazer that way. And that she's played a pioneering role in the LGBTIQ activism, in creating inclusive spaces, and then addressing multiple intersectionalities and differential power structures within the community. And Urvashi, as we know, she was named by the Out magazine as one of the 50 most influential LGBT people in the United States back in August 2009. And she worked in various capacities in the National LGBTQ Task Force back then, which is the oldest LGBT civil rights organization as we know of, apart from publishing prolifically. And two of her books, Virtual Equality and Irresistible Revolution, one published in 1995 and one 2012, played a very important role in inaugurating and then perpetuating discourses around, say, brown LGBTQ bodies in the United States. And, I believe her loss leaves us with a vacuum which would remain, and it will always remain as a reminder of the kind of work which we need to do and we need to keep doing. It was important for me to remember Urvashi in this occasion because I was planning, even before, she passed away, I was actually planning to start this session on Varta by remembering Pravartak. And as you all know that Pravartak, or which was rechristened as Naya Pravartak later on, the journey was very interesting, like in the early 90s. And the time parallels the time when Urvashi was actually making a mark in the United States. And all these histories were actually connected, very deeply connected, as we know that the Indian diaspora in the US, they played quite a significant role in actually kickstarting the movement here. Although a lot of us, we were like much younger at that time, but Pavan, his friends, and many others around that time, without them, like the rhetoric of an LGBTQ movement was firmly in place and people were ready to go, and a lot of support because it was a global phenomenon. The 90s were really because as far as because it was actually coming during when the AIDS epidemic was at its highest, at its height, and at a climax when there was this constant battle with the United States, with the government about finding protection for HIV infected people, and that was happening in 1989, as we know. 1989 is such a watershed moment when ACT UP came up, and the kind of camaraderie we saw around ACT UP. And 1991, for that matter, was a very important year because queer theory as such was kind of originated within the academia thanks to Teresa Dolores in that very iconic conference that she had, which was called Queer Theory. It was like, bringing the term queer and theory together within the academia for the first time ever. All studies already in the US, queer theory was something which would show us the path in the coming days. And that was also the time when Pravartak was actually born in Calcutta. Now, all these histories were very, very deeply connected, and it is important to be reminded of those times, because without those times, without that kind of grounding, we might not have been here that we are today. Actually, in fact, in the 90s, like going back to the 90s and thinking of Bengal particularly at that time, affirmative knowledge of homosexuality was a rarity, and not just in the 90s, even till the 2000s. Like, right, if you had to look up something written in Bangla or in kind of local writings on queer identities, politics, that was very rare. We never came across those things very easily. And over and above, there was a constant anxiety of being judged, like if one chose to produce such knowledge or searched for it in bookstores, newsstands, or libraries. In fact, there was a dearth of reference material which could enable the discourse to be inaugurated around LGBTQ plus identities, particularly for many of us who were in the academia. Like, I was in school at that time, but what I'm trying to say is that academia needed a kind of an activism support at that time, and the material that was produced through activism, so that gender studies in universities, colleges could be expanded to incorporate the queer into it. And Pravartak, which was self-published by Pavan, as we know, opened up the possibility of recording queer lives, desires, pains, misgivings. And back in the early 90s, when queer, in fact, back in the 90s, when queer was uh, not a familiar term in India. Like, we didn't use the word queer that now that the way we use it today. So it took quite some time for the term queer to catch up with the LGBTQ community. But anyway, almost after 2 decades, when Varta was launched to take the story forward, by that time, Kolkata had a recognizable LGBTQ populace, and of course a movement, of course, again launched by the Friendship Walk back in 1999. Now, what Varta did, I mean, at least I can speak for myself, that Varta did was to create a rich archive of queer knowledge, which is accessible for free. Now, this is very important, free knowledge. Of course, the internet enabled it, but knowledge is something that we have always purchased. And when you have an archive which is open to you, that enabled in-depth research on LGBTQ lives and identity politics, speaking locally about it. It was very important to tell local stories within a global paradigm. And the democratization of queer knowledge, I would like to put it that way, that we experienced on the virtual pages of Varta has actually assisted me and many of my own students to produce interesting theses on local queer histories. Time and again, Varta has made us disturbingly aware of the queer intersectionalities. I mean, every time I did Varta, and sometimes, Varta actually made me so very aware of my privileges, and to, take a double take on that every time. And while generating, and of course, at the same time, it also generated the necessity of rethinking the possibility of opening up livelihood opportunities for members of the community, as we have seen that, occasionally we read those stories in Varta, and we know the connection also. So the narratives Varta came up with during the COVID-19 pandemic in particular, I can tell you, like, I know I'm witness to that, has now become a go-to archive for international scholars trying to make sense of the impact of the pandemic on the LGBTQ community in Kolkata and in Bengal around that time. Also, the community services that we have come to know through the pages of Varta have immensely helped members of our community during the pandemic and thereafter. It always did, but in the pandemic, it was much more handy. And I remember, like, reaching out to Pavan so many times for so many people who were in need. Now, today we have with us a panel of activists who have contributed to Varta in very significant ways, as I've already said. And we shall hear them speak today about their association with the Webzine by turns, and also their journey along with Varta, because I think all of us grew up with Varta in the last 7, 8 years, 9 years that we had, and we saw so much, like 2013 is an iconic year. 2018 is another watershed moment in the LGBTQ community. And of course, the pandemic in 2019, in 2020. So we have seen and we have grown with Varta also. And we have seen how, the kind of articles written in Varta in the beginning and how the kind of articles that we see now, that also kind of marks a, I would say, if you see those articles, read them one after the other in progression, chronologically, see a graph, kind of a graph of the LGBTQ community evolving in a certain direction. Anyway, before I, approach the other panelists, I would love to, invite Pavan, who has kept the website afloat for so many years, relentlessly populating its pages with stories which, as I can see from my personal experience, undergo rigorous editorial scrutiny. I shall briefly introduce Pavan, though he does not need an introduction, I'm sure, but nonetheless. So Pavan Dhal is a Kolkata-based queer activist, archivist, researcher, and writer. He was a founding member of Council Club Kolkata 1993 to 2002, among India's earliest queer support groups, and edited its house journal Pravartak. He worked with Sathi from 2002 to 2014 on universal access to health and social justice. He is now associated with Varta Trust as founding trustee. His latest publications include Queer Potli, Memories, Imaginations, and Reimaginations of Urban Queer Spaces in India, published by Queer Inc. in 2019, and Out of Line and Offline, Queer Mobilizations in 90s Eastern India, Seagull Books 2020. Pavan, your experiences of,
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Kaustav. Those were very glowing words, and I mean, I'm so happy to about the fact that you have pointed out, or you have described Varta in so many ways that probably I wouldn't have thought of talking about it. In fact, when you said that Pravartak in the 90s was like a medium of information, people were looking for information, and that immediately took me to the days when Pravartak was stocked in a small bookstore called Classic Books on Middleton Street. And that was a rare thing to happen, because in those days, queer publications like Pravartak or Bombay Dost, we did not have public platforms for distribution. So I remember that the manager of the bookstore telling me that it seems now this bookstore has become just a queer hangout, because nobody is here coming to buy any other books. Everybody is just looking for Pravartak, for Bombay Dost, or for Trikon. And my point was that, so that gives you such a good idea about the pent-up demand that people have, how suppressed people have been with regard to information around LGBT issues, around gender and sexuality. And so, Pravartak is filling a very important gap. And whatever is happening in the bookstore in terms of so much footfall for people looking for Pravartak, ultimately you are doing a great service, because no other bookstore is going to allow this kind of opportunity. So now cut to 2013, many years later, when already there was so much information around about LGBT issues. So some of our founding members of Varta as a group had also brought this up, that why should we have yet another queer publication, and what is it really going to achieve? So I remember that a number of us remarked that, first of all, Varta is going to be a continuation of what was published in the past. So it is not going to be just another publication. It is going to draw from the lessons learned in the past, the queer histories from the past, which very few other publications can provide. And second is that today is the time to look at issues, broader issues of gender and sexuality, because, in workshops and all, we have gone tired talking about the fact that it's not LGBT people only who have a gender or a sexuality. Everybody has a gender or a sexuality, or including the fact that they may be agendered or asexual. The point is that the dialogue around gender and sexuality has to widen. It has to not be just limited to LGBT folks. And then LGBT people are not just gay or lesbian or transgender. They are also disabled. They are also Dalit, or they are also located in rural areas. They face disadvantages or privileges which we haven't talked about in the past. In the 90s and the 2000s, all the efforts were around mobilizing people and bringing them together and keeping them together. There wasn't that much of an opportunity to go into the nuances that we can afford to talk about today, because a certain level of mobilization has already happened. And we also have the technology of the online technology, which enables much faster dialogue. It has its limitations. It presupposes the knowledge of a certain language. It presupposes digital literacy and all of those issues. But at the same time, it has taken the dialogue to a different level. Today, that is what Varta as a publication in the internet era, in the post-Facebook era, has enjoyed. We have carried stories from remotest parts of Odisha, West Bengal, Manipur, Assam. And this has been possible much more easily than it would have been in the past. Because there are people, there are activists in all these places now, and the internet has helped us to connect. And Varta has managed to, I would say, mobilize all these resources, all the knowledge that is already around, and present it through its pages in a more contemporary fashion. So I guess that this was what was top of my mind. But today is not really about listening to me. I would be very happy to hear from all my colleagues who are here, who have contributed invaluable perspectives to the pages of Varta. So thank you, Kaustav.
Thank you, Pavan. That was really interesting. And, every time, because Pravartak now, it's like the entire, the Pravartak issues are now available online. And when we compared with Varta, we could see, the journey that we all had in the last 20, 25 years. And, on the pages of Varta, as you connected back to Pravartak, it was like living histories. And all of us have created histories in very small micro ways, maybe, but, all of that had contributed in a very, very significant way. And today, all our panelists that we have today with us, all of them, they are part of this history in the making, because when these these years will be recalled, they say 20 years from now, 10 years from now, we don't realize when it is done. But, today with this, the way we talk about archiving, today we talk about history. So we know how important it is to write down every moment of it, because this is how we are archiving the present, which will certainly, help in rewriting the history of the in the future. From Pavan, I would like to move on to Devjyoti Ghosh. Devjyoti is a human rights lawyer and academic from Kolkata, India, currently working with the University of Pretoria, South Africa. Devjyoti, welcome. And Devjyoti, you have contributed regularly to Varta, and your articles have given us interesting insights into the idea of the sexual citizen subject. But today, however, I would ask you to share your views on a very topical issue on which you have written about, is the Varta Economic Inclusion Mentoring Forum's work, on which you had published one article in September 2021. And I believe that was a very important intervention in terms of creation of livelihood in Kolkata for the LGBTQ people. Devjyoti, if you can, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Kaustav. Thank you so much for having me, everyone. Very, very good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. So Kaustav, when I wrote that article, it was, at the end of the Delta wave of the pandemic, right? More or less the end. Let's face it, it carried on for a few months more before Omicron struck. So one thing that became very evident was that a lot of the social movements that we generally talk about and which are carried to courts are extremely class-centric. Right. So automatically what happens is like the livelihoods of people who are primarily like, say 80% of the queer population, which is under threat, who are going without shelter, they often get sidelined because the media loves being occupied with particular news items, which of course give hope to a lot of people. There is no doubt that we need flag bearers within the community. But that was something that I think Varta did made a very conscious effort of trying to bridge that gap. And that's one wonderful thing about the Varta webzine, is that it is actually not very class-centric. It does discuss everything from economic inclusion of the lowest, most downtrodden person to marriage inclusion happening at the cases happening at the high courts and Supreme Courts. So this sort of an intersectional aspect that comes in with the webzine is not always there in all publications. Several publications that we see across the world tend to focus only on the larger issues which mostly affect middle to upper middle class queer people. And when I say queer people, let's face it, we are just talking about cis gay men. So Varta makes a very conscious effort of not branding itself that way, of moving away from the eyes and the lens of using, middle class cis gay men as their only lens of approach into society, into activism, which is why we also have such a dynamic lot of contributors. And the kind of contributions, if you see, even in my work, although I tend to focus a lot on certain legal aspects and human rights aspects, we try and pull in different things like, from film reviews to interviews with trans people to, as Pavan was saying, from the remotest corners of Orissa and the northeast of India, the stories which would generally go unheard within the English language article base that we have. And what you mentioned earlier is so important. Knowledge used to be in the hands of the few who could afford it earlier, right? Today, yes, there is definitely a barrier when it comes to having internet access, to having a degree of knowledge in English. But Varta tries very hard to bridge that gap and bring a degree of knowledge and a large database of knowledge to people who wouldn't otherwise have access. Things are at people's fingertips. It is relatively easy to access. You need a modicum of education, yes, but I have come across people who have accessed it without having much knowledge of how to use interfaces, which was quite a learning curve for me as well. So, I think the economic inclusion is also, the forum is also reflective of that. Who are the people who are actually reaching out to the Varta database? What are the things that we really require to reach out for, and how to bridge those gaps? And it is definitely a work in progress, every day is a new learning for all of us at Varta. And mentoring queer people is something that has always come quite naturally, I think, within the queer community, because we try and look out for our own, so to say. But to have a forum to do it through, I think makes a huge difference. Over to you, Kaustav.
Thank you, Devjyoti. Like what you said, economic inclusion. And what is interesting is like when we write these micro histories, which is, we know that, writing history is also a very hegemonic process. It depends upon who is writing that history. And because we see such, multiple people from different kind of backgrounds coming together and voicing their issues and the way they talk about it, all forms of inclusion. And also, at this moment, what I feel that we are far, and you as a lawyer, you would be able to reflect on that more, that we are far from policy making. Although there has been like a reading down of Section 377, that was just a kind of a baby step we took towards inclusion, perhaps. But what about policy making? We are standing in a very, gray area now, in a twilight zone. We really do not know the next steps that we should take. Although, like, there is so much controversy around, legalization of same-sex marriage. I would say that we have not really arrived at a point when so many other things are still unaddressed. And I think, this is what I felt on the pages of Varta, that we really need to go through the pages of Varta to understand that what are those gaps, what are those lacunae, which really needs to be talked about at this moment. And that brings me to the work of Santa Kurai, is a Manipuri indigenous Nupi Manabi transgender woman. I'm just translating that. She's a writer and an activist scholar. She is associated with Amana and Sathi. A few of her published works are Theatre Gender at Periphery, Visibilizing the Invisible, The Forbidden Prophecies, My Father and Nupi Manabi Thabal, Poems Contributed in the World Belongs to Us. The translation of The Yellow Sparrow is her upcoming book. Now, Santa, welcome very much. And I, I was I personally very fascinated with your work. I have been following your work every time, you have written, because sometimes the Northeast, particularly Manipur, is so very neglected, and we rarely get to hear these stories being, I mean, we never see these stories in the mainstream, quote unquote. And I'm very glad that, Varta brought you on board so many times, and so many wonderful stories which we have come across, and it actually filled a vacuum, which was existing out there. It was staring at us, but we couldn't do much about it. But your articles have actually filled that vacuum. And also, one particular article which actually I found very moving, and where you talk about trans women in Manipur being denied their traditional space in the Lai Harauba festival back in 2019. Today, when you are with us and you have voiced so many opinions on the pages of Varta, I would like to know that what is the scenario today? Has anything changed at all since 2019 when you wrote that article? Can you reflect on that a little more on this occasion?
Yeah, actually, thanks for inviting me. And then, talking about change, I can't say there is a huge change in Manipur since 2019, but actually there are shifts that is taking place in Manipur. So how do this shift take place? It's multidimensional. I cannot say because there is change in the socio-legal protection, or there is change in the other scenario. It's a very huge spectrum, which I find difficult to pick up one and tell the people that this is the change. But definitely there is shift taking place. And the other thing is writing is my passion, and then I also would like to appreciate Pawan Dhal, because he enabled me to continue writing when we were collaborating a few years back in one pilot project, which was funded by Success University. And that was the time where I was encouraged to continue writing. And then I started writing. I started mobilizing community to write their own stories. And then that also really helped us to enhance the skills of writing, and then collecting stories from the community peoples. And then later on, this Umang converse controversy is always there. And then recently, one new cultural group came up, and then they also prohibited transgender peoples, and then Nupa Amaibi, the transgender shaman, to continue this ritual occupation. Before 2022, they were silent. Everybody was silent. The cultural group was silent, because after they banned the community to enter the Lai Harau bus chat, that I did a research, that Faida, gender at periphery. And that also helps people to understand the gender plurality and multiplicity that was once existed and accepted in the actual Manipuri society. And I also brought out a lot of evidence of their existence, the unconventional gender and sexuality peoples. And then I also gave the reason how the institution of this community and their existence were annihilated. That was due to the layers of colonization. First, the Burmese invasion, then came British, then Hindu Okay, so when Manipur was annexed to India, there was a lot of changes in the infrastructure and the constitutional laws in Manipur. And that also one factor that, that destroyed the institution of Faida and the entire palace and the principality of Kangla. So that was what I found. And then the other thing is like writing stories sometimes, even though it's my passion, livelihood is also very important. Even if you wanted to continue writing when you don't have food, when you don't have a proper shelter, it is very difficult to be productive. Okay, because writing is an art. It requires emotion. So when you are in a very disturbed state of mind, then it is very difficult to articulate your stories. So this is what I feel. So if we wanted to encourage the community to continue writing their story, at least we need a proper fund, even archiving. Okay. And then the other thing is like we have very limited support system. Even the community are writing their stories, we need a translator, a very good translator. If we are going to hire a translator, definitely the person will ask for money, and we need a good editor. Okay, when I was collaborating and working with Pawan was editing my stories. Okay, even now also he is editing my stories, and I'm very glad that I am able to have a friend like Pawan. But actually, it's very difficult for us to find a person like Pawan. Okay, so this is the entire thing. And then the second thing is like recently I had a very rich, very strange experience which I never expect in my life, because I contribute stories to people. I contribute a lot of things to people. It doesn't mean that I wanted to get back in returns from people, but at least at a time of crisis, I also require support from people. So I have contributed a lot. So like for instance, I contributed stories in water and sanitation, and then one white person was leading that project. And then I believe that he must have disseminated these stories, and then must have earned name and fame. This is my belief, because but actually, when I reached out to people, when I was struggling to get a loan to complete a house, then people didn't take it seriously. And then they said my country did not allow to support such proposal. So that was the entire thing. So like my vulnerability, what I wanted to flag out here is like I being a person from the periphery, my vulnerability, and then my representation is, and the difficulties that I have been facing is multi-layered and multidimensional. First, my geographical location, the second language, the third is the networking. Okay, because people can't easily understand my situation, my human rights situation. When we talk about the queer narratives in India, what people sees at the forefront is like, the conventional, the traditional identity that we have, like Hizra, blah, blah, all those things. So the question of diversity is not there. People always talk about diversity and inclusion, but in the reality, people always try to pick up the things that is floating on the surface. Okay, so like even within the queer community, also the under-researched subject like Nupi Manbi and Nupa Manba is not really in their understanding. When talking about archiving, we need to do a lot of work, like Nupa Amaibi, transgender shaman. It's very important to preserve and promote this culture. It's very unique because it's somehow close to Nat Kadao, but the presentation, participation, and the procedure of becoming a shaman is completely different from Nat Kadao, Burma's Nat Kadao. So I was also thinking to do in-depth research on transgender Nupa Amaibi, but I do believe that many of the literature will be found in Rangoon University. But this also requires a time frame, which will require a huge fund. But once it is, if I am able to do this research, then it will be a very good asset to the international community. And this is what I believe. So like, writing is very important, because in India, we have a very less queer scholarly. So the community, if we wanted to encourage the community to write stories, we definitely requires a proper fund, so that, because at the end of the day, community are, we have very less opportunity. We don't have financial sustainability. So writing is something which we are aiming to give sustainability to other community. But actually the community writer, we also need to think about the sustainability of the community writer. So if we wanted to give the sustainability to the community writer, we also need to make sure that that writer should get a proper shelter, food, okay? And because, like, we need to nurture the writer, so that it will enable the writer to, articulate his or her writing skills. Okay, this is what I think. But otherwise, I'm very happy. I'm glad that for having me in this conversation, and it's very important. And archiving, Pawan and I had also discussed several times about archiving, but like, we had so many other work, and then we were not able to continue that conversation. Sometimes when we catch up, then I used to remind Pawan, what should we do now? We wanted to do a lot, but actually the thing is, like, we had less resources. Resources is very important. When we say resources, there's a lot of things we need to talk about, we need to work on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Santa. That was wonderful, because, like, for many of us who are metropolis, we are centered in the metropolis, we are located in the metropolis. It is when I say metropolis, I'm certainly talking about the center. And when these stories, as they pour in from the margins, they tell us, as I said earlier also, it also marks out our privileges. But what you also say at the same time, which I understand, and I do empathize with you there, because that is exactly the kind of paucity in funds that we see nowadays when it comes to tell stories from the margins. There's barely any funds, and it's very important, as you said, nurturing the writer, nurturing those stories. Actually, you just don't nurture those writers, you nurture those stories, which would, in a way, double up as history as we progress with time. So maybe, yes, I mean, more work needs to be done in this area, and your articles have been fascinatingly contributing to this. And I believe there will be more coming up, and maybe some ways could be figured out in which these stories could be sustained and preserved. Thank you, Santo, once more. And with that, I move on to Jia Mata, who is a queer feminist freelance writer-translator, a part-time soft skills trainer, and part-time activist. As a parent of a 16-year-old happy and well-adjusted gender-fluid pan-romantic ace child, Jia is proud to have made a safe enough space at home for the offspring to be completely and proudly themselves. Welcome, Jia. And Jia, you have brought to the readers of Varta an interesting range of write-ups, from Bollywood cinema's queer currency to the importance of queering mental health. However, one particular article of yours, which left an indelible impression, and it was important that, it was a very, very important article, one on the toxicity of queer romances, and where the if I talk about the LGBTQ movement at this moment, I would still say it is at a very rudimentary stage, and most minority movements, choose to shove beneath the carpet stories that might affect the movement in the slightest way. Any negative story, anything, is usually not talked about. I'm glad that Varta actually brought out this article by you. But what is important, what I want to ask you today, is that writing about the toxic aspects of queer intimacies, I'm sure was a challenge, because, talking to people, getting stories, making them tell their own stories. But, what is more important to me at this moment is that, are we talking about these toxicities in queer relationships? Are we talking about gaslighting? Are we talking about anything? So are we talking about it enough, or are we not talking about it at all? Jia, over to you.
Like you mentioned, I write about a lot of different things, and that's mainly because I'm not really very academic in my background or approach. So the way my mind works is, there are things that either irritate and anger me or really interest me a lot, and then I write about them. Right? So it'll either go on my blog, or I will tell the idea to Pawan and he like it, and off it goes to Varta. And that's kind of how the toxicity article also happened, is because we were talking about that in one of my conversations with my various friends. And because now, at least, very recently maybe, but now at least toxic elements or toxicity in mainstream relationships, so-called cis-het relationships, is being talked about, right? We've started focusing on those mental health aspects. We are talking about getting help. There's a lot of, for example, one of the things that brought this home to me was the amount of OTT content right now, whether it's Netflix or Prime or any of these channels. There's a lot of content on these kind of issues, and all of them have, they either begin the episode or end the episode with helpline numbers, and if you know somebody who needs help, reach out. And I was just thinking that where is this conversation about the community, our community, the queer community happening? Because, well, for one, we haven't had any real conversations for a long time because of pandemic and all that. And even before that, I don't remember, because like Kaustav just said, it is a tendency, and I completely understand that tendency in in a fight to be accepted and recognized, and in a fight to get equality and rights and so on. An already demonized community is far less likely to show aspects of itself which will add to that demonization, right? It's like we always say, if a man drives badly, a man drives badly. If a woman drives badly, women are bad drivers, right? And that extends so much more to marginalized communities like the LGBTQ+, because there we either have to be perfect and be this see, we are just like you and we fit in, but the just like you extends only to the good things. It doesn't, I cannot stand there and say, oh, we are just like you, and we beat each other up as much as you do in your relationships, because then that will put a black mark on my entire community and probably push the acceptability war or the battle for rights, God knows how much back. But then, as Pawan realizes, as he has very bravely shown through Varta, that these conversations do need to happen. And if they're not happening, then maybe it's time we start them rolling. So maybe an article like this can be the beginning of a talking point for some conversation in some chai adda, some, somewhere where a bunch of us are hanging out, maybe at a theater or a movie screening or whatever it is. So that's why, because I feel strongly about it, and these conversations do need to happen. Like we've had other ideas about things like this. That's another this kind of thought process is also where I think that series of there has been an article on it also, I think, in Varta of, for example, how to, safe dating practices. We don't want to talk about bad things that happen. We don't want to go there. Nobody wants to really face those things, or the way that we very often, engage in really high risk behaviors simply to feel connected to somebody else, because that again, it negatively impacts the image that we are probably trying to project. But these things do happen, and if not with the larger world, but at least within the community, we need to be talking about these things. But having said that, I also this is something that I thought I would say today, is I was reading, because I wanted to speak here today, I was reading through the list of articles that Varta has so far come up with, and I'm floored by the range. Right, we've talked about so many things in so many different ways, and David Jyoti also mentioned that it's not just academic discussions, it's not just cerebralization, it's also movie reviews and book reviews and food places to go eat, which have some kind of social impact as well. And there's mental health, there's legal help, there's so many things that has happened, and I'm so very proud to be part of this. Next, off to you, Kaustav.
Thank you, Jaya. Actually, like when I told Devajyoti that there is no policy making as such so far, and we are looking at legalization of same-sex marriage, Jaya, your article actually, made me rethink that whether, Varta should now critical on whether really need to amend a few things. For example, the rape law. The rape law, we have kind of decriminalized homosexuality, read down section 377, what about rape law? Because they fall to the Indian kind of constitutionally, but we really need to relook at the rape law. And since very recently, as we all know, for the last 1 year, we are hearing a lot about domestic violence and marital rape, for that matter, which is like at the center stage of the legal debates which are happening in various courts. I would like to I believe that it is very important that these laws, the protection that a marriage demands, because we may demand a marriage, we may demand kind of a legalization of intimacies, but have we actually looked into all these other aspects which also need to fence that marriage with a kind of a circle of protection? That's not there. It's like, if you plunge into marriage without these laws remaining as they are, then it is like having sex without condom. I mean, it's very much like that. It would be as risky as that. So we really need to talk about this. And from here, I would like to move on to another, very important aspect of intersectionality, which we have seen, like Varta has done that wonderfully, talking about disabilities and sexuality. We have with us Shampa Sengupta, who is a Kolkata-based activist working on disability and gender rights with work experience of over 3 decades. She has initiated a non-funded advocacy group called Shruti Disability Rights Center and was elected to serve as the Joint Secretary of National Platform for the Rights of the Disabled, India's largest cross-disability network. She identifies herself as a person with a psychological disability. She is also a primary caregiver of people with disabilities. Presently, her focus is on policy-level changes, particularly on the intersection of gender and disabilities. Shampati, welcome to this panel. We are really, kind of privileged to have you with us. You too, like all of all the other colleagues that we have today, you have written on multiple topics for Varta. But today I would like you to speak a bit on the possibility of addressing issues of sexuality of people with psychological disabilities. In fact, one of your articles based on a presentation you had at a national conference on sexuality, rights and psychological disability back in 2017 was carried by Varta. In fact, I would tell you this also helped us at Jadavpur University conceptualize our project Bodies of Difference. So today, Shampati, could you tell us the challenges parents and caregivers face in addressing the issue of sexuality when it comes to people with psychological disabilities, and how can these challenges be surmounted? Do we need a different language? What do we need? I mean, how we can deal with this? Shampati.
Thank you, Kaustav. And congratulations to Varta and Pawan, and I think all of us who are part of it in some ways. It's a privilege to be part of this panel today. For me, before going to your specific question, what I'd like to talk a little bit about my journey with Varta. Yeah, I think the time I started writing in Varta that was a time then very few webzines actually accepted articles on disability. Disability became much more accepted, but I think post RPD Act 2016, when more mainstream media and the web-based magazines started writing about it. So, and one thing I'd like to mention here is Pawan particularly was very particular from the beginning that Varta should be accessible for all kinds of for persons with all kinds of disabilities. We know that you need certain kind of changes in a website to make so that a person with visual impairment can read, a person with who's having dyslexia can read. They need certain kind of changes, and Pawan had been very, very particular that these changes are made. And I can say that I have written in many places, and but it's very rare to see that this kind of interventions, and Varta is not something an organization having large number of funds and resources to make this particular kind of changes. So, and I think it's very important to remember that how you have to change internally also. For the very specific question that is talked about the sexuality of people with intellectual disabilities and psychosocial disabilities, of course, from the very maybe a few years ago also, we used to, a very common term used was their disabled people are asexual. So asexual term was assigned to them without understanding the term, the meaning of asexuality. So now we can see a definite kind of change particularly even in the special school, even in the disability sector, where we are talking about it. I think the disability movement is talking about sexuality. I'll not say quite a lot, but but it's very sad because it's still very need-based kind of discussion. So until and unless you need to manage a child who's quote unquote misbehaving in a special school scenario, because almost all the special schools will say they have one child who's adolescent age who will start masturbating in a classroom because he doesn't know. I mean, he gets pleasure from it and he doesn't know how to handle it. So and this kind of stories come from almost all the special schools, and it's like all over India. So you need to know how to handle that kind of situation. You cannot tell him that masturbation is bad, but you have to say that it's better to do it in a private space. And so teaching privacy and private and public and those kind of issues. It's also very, very interesting because I started getting some questions from special educators and even the school principals talk to us and saying that previously it was much more easier to teach intellectual disabled children. We used to show a picture of a long hair, someone wearing a dress, and that this is a girl, and with someone with short hair and maybe a trousers and a shirt is a boy. So now that we have to introduce a transgender person also, how do we show that? Because for a person with intellectual disability may not have that kind of capability to understand the small nuances of where to draw a border or what kind of lines should be mentioned. So I think it's very interesting that at least the disability sector is talking about it. We have not yet reached any kind of destination, any kind of point where, and I'll not say that all the schools are talking, all the special schools throughout India have started talking about it, but at least some schools are talking about it. They've started discussing this kind of issues. And that is something very important, that disabled people have different kind of identities. So, I mean, none of us have only one identity. So a disabled person can have different gender identities, and of course, the class, caste, all those issues are there. So you can have different identities. And if we don't talk about those issues, then somehow we are missing the larger disability rights issue. We cannot talk only about access to education, physical access, about a ramp or braille books or sign language expert. We need to talk about all this kind of things. So yeah, there are changes happening. But if Kaustav gives me 1 or 2 more minutes, I just wanted to share one anecdote, which I think is very, very important. I remember when our RPD Act was getting past, when I was very much in the part of the movement, when I was sort of fighting in the street, writing, coming back to the room, writing about it. And I think many of my articles was published in Varta. So I think in 2016, when all of a sudden there was a lull, they were not introducing the law. So we were there, I was there in Delhi, taking part in a large dharna. We were talking about, and our banner was saying, bring back RPD Act. So all of a sudden, that day, central government announced that they will be not only bringing, they'll pass the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act within few days. So I was in Delhi, and I think that time Pawan called me, and so because I told him that on 3rd December, that World Disability Day, I'll tell him, give him some information which can be published in Varta. So when I told him that maybe in 1 or 2 days, RPT will be our law will be tabled and it will be passed. So, and I very clearly remember he told me, so you are in midst of the history. You are seeing the law getting changed. And you're in Delhi now. I mean, you went there to demand that, and when you're coming back, you have already seen the passage of the law. And I think it's very important to write about this important issues, because we're talking about archives, as in all other marginalized groups. We also don't archive our movements, our histories. So herein lies the importance of Varta to me, because many of my articles during the passage of RPD was actually published by Varta. So once when we look back at those stage of the movement, when we were fighting, what were we demanding at that point of time, and finally what we got, and now of course the implementation process. So when we, I think the future people who will do research on this important aspect of the passage of RPD, they'll probably have to look at Varta and see what kind of, I mean, because it's actually the history has been written there. So over to you, Kaustav. The moment I talk about passage of RPD, I get goosebumps and I become emotional. Sorry for that.
No, not at all. I believe, like, why do we need people from the community to write their own stories? Because, as we have realized over the years, that history cannot be written from an objective point of view. There has to be a subjective engagement, because history needs to be affective. History cannot be objective. So if you do not get emotional about histories, then your stories really do not, come across. So I think that's what we experience on the pages of Varta, where people telling their own stories, and then all those little stories are being strung together to form a larger history, what I call affective historicization, which is very, very important. With that, we are going to move on to our last but not the least, panelist Shudipa. Shudipa Chakraborty is a Kolkata-based social worker associated with the LGBT movement, rights and sexual and mental health since 1998. She is also associated as a volunteer at the Varta Trust. So Shudipa, I would like to tell you, তোমাকে বলি যে তোমার লকডাউনের যে গল্পগুলো আমরা বার্তাতে পড়েছি, fascinating stories. In fact, তোমাকে আমার বলা হয়নি, আমি ভাবছিলাম তোমার আর্টিকেলটা পাঠাবো, আমি পাবনকে পাঠিয়েছি। সেটা হচ্ছে তোমার আর্টিকেল গুলো প্রলিফেরিক্যালি তোমার সাইটেড হয়েছে। একটা খুব ইন্টারেস্টিং আর্টিকেল বেরিয়েছে, তার নাম হচ্ছে রিডিফাইনিং সেফ বডিজ, কুইয়ারিং দ্য শিফটিং বডি পলিটিক্স ডিউরিং দ্য কোভিড-19 প্যান্ডেমিক। এটা আমাদের একটি ছাত্র লিখেছে, যাদবপুরের, এখন আইআইটিতে আছে। আর্টিকেলটা বেরিয়েছে টেলর অ্যান্ড ফ্রান্সিসের একটা খুব প্রেস্টিজিয়াস জার্নালে, তার নাম হচ্ছে ডিস্টিংশন, জার্নাল অফ সোশ্যাল থিওরি। আমি শুরুতে বলেছিলাম আমার ইন্ট্রোডাকশনে যে কোভিড-19 যে গল্পগুলো আমরা বার্তাতে পেয়েছি, সেই গল্পগুলো এখন গো টু মেটেরিয়াল হয়ে গেছে ইন্টারন্যাশনাল স্কলার্সদের জন্য। ওই গল্পগুলো পড়ে তারা সেখান থেকে অনেক কিছু জানতে পারছে। ইনফ্যাক্ট সুদীপা, তোমাকে আমি আগে বলেছি যে আমি চান্দার গল্প, তুমি যেটা বলেছো সেটা আমি নিজে সাইট করেছি আমার মায়ামৃতঙ্গের আর্টিকেলটাতে, এবং ইট ওয়াজ ভেরি অ্যাপ্রিসিয়েটেড বাই আ লট অফ পিপল। তো তুমি কতটা রিয়েলাইজ করবে জানি না, কিন্তু তোমার কোভিড এর গল্পগুলো কিন্তু এখন আই উড সে ইন্টারন্যাশনাল মেটেরিয়াল টু ফল ব্যাক অন ফর অল দোজ ভেরি ছোট ছোট গল্পগুলো যেগুলো আমরা বেঙ্গল থেকে জানতে পারছিলাম। কিন্তু আমার যেটা তোমার থেকে জানা, সুদীপা, তুমি যেগুলো দিক নিয়ে কথা বলেছো, তুমি চান্দার গল্পটা বলেছো যে লন্ডা ডান্সার ছিল, আহ কিন্তু সব গল্পগুলো বলার পিছনেও, যে গল্পটা খুঁজে বার করার পিছনেও তো একটা গল্প থাকে। সুদীপা, আমি তোমাকে ওই গল্পটা বলতে বলবো, যে তুমি যে গল্পগুলো খুঁজে পেলে সেগুলোকে ন্যারেটিভাইজ করলে, এক জায়গায় করলে, এই জিগোলো ছেলেটির সাথে তোমার, বা চন্দার গল্পটা, এই গল্প খোঁজার যে গল্পটা, এটা যদি আমাদের বলো, কারণ এটা খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট যে যারা ইতিহাস লিখছে বা যারা গল্প লিখছে, গল্প খুঁজে বার করা, এক্সক্যাভেট করা একটা প্রসেস। এটার গল্পটা তোমার থেকে আজকে জানতে চাইবো।
সবার আগে ধন্যবাদ। আর আমি আমার কথা শুরু করব সবার আগে রবীন্দ্রনাথের ওই একটা কথা দিয়ে, যে তোমার কথায় তা কেউ তো বলে না, করে শুধু পিছে কোলাহল। আমাদের মতো মানুষজনরা, যে সকল মানুষজনরা সমাজের মধ্যে বিভিন্ন প্রতিবন্ধকতায় দিয়ে চলে বা বেঁচে আছে, সেই মানুষজনগুলোর খোঁজ খবর হয়তো অনেকেই রাখে না, বা তার কথা শোনার মতো সময় থাকে না। কিন্তু তুমি যে কথাগুলো বললে, চান্দা বা আদার্স কমিউনিটি যেটা রয়েছে, সম্রাট, এদের কথাগুলো আমার কাছে আজকে নয়, এরা আমার বহুদিনের, আমি তো বহুদিনে এলজিবিটি কমিউনিটির মুভমেন্টের সাথে যুক্ত রয়েছি। এরা আমাদের একজন আমাদের পথসঙ্গী, আমাদের সঙ্গে হেঁটেছে, চলেছে, এবং তাদেরকে অনেক দিন ধরেই তাদেরকে দেখেছি এবং অবজার্ভ করেছি, তাদের লাইফস্টাইল গুলোকে, তাদের ইস্যু গুলোকে। সেখান থেকেই উঠে আসা গল্প সেগুলো। এবং সব থেকে ইন্টারেস্টিংলি, আই এম টকিং অ্যাবাউট দ্যাট পিরিয়ড, যখন আমাদের COVID-19 স্টার্ট হলো, দেন সাডেনলি আই টকড উইথ পাওয়ান, যে আমাদের কিছু একটা করতে হবে, যেটা সম্ভবত আমাদের যে প্রেজেন্ট সিচুয়েশন এবং আমাদের যে এখন সোসাইটির যে একটা যেরকম পরিস্থিতি চলছে, সেই পরিস্থিতিগুলোকে আমাদের একটুখানি মনে হয় খুঁজে বার করার খুব প্রয়োজন আছে। কারণ এখন আমরা খুব ক্রিটিক্যাল সিচুয়েশনে রয়েছি, কারণ আমাদের লাইভলিহুড প্রবলেম। আমরা অনেক জায়গায় অনেক কথা বলেছি, শান্তা অনেক কথা বলেছে এবং অনেক প্রসঙ্গে লাইভলিহুডের কথা উঠে এসছে। কিন্তু সার্টেন COVID-19 আসার পর থেকে মানুষের পুরো ব্যাকবোনটা ভেঙে গেছে, এবং সেখানে মানুষ দিশাহারা ভাবে খুঁজে বেরিয়েছে তারা কিভাবে তাদের দৈনন্দিন জীবনের, তাদের ক্ষুধা, তাদের যে চালাবে বা সংসার চলবে, বা তাদের আদার্স যে নিডস গুলো, ফান্ডামেন্টাল নিডস গুলো রয়েছে, সেগুলো কিভাবে তারা ফুলফিল করবে। এটা একটা বিশাল বড় চ্যালেঞ্জেস এর মধ্যে দিয়ে যাওয়া শুরু হয়েছিল সেই সময় কোভিডে। এবং ফরচুনেটলি দ্যাট টাইম পাওয়ান বার্তার তরফ থেকে সিটিজেন জার্নালিজমের মতো একটি প্রোগ্রাম চালু করেছিল, যেখানে আমরা আমাদের কাজই ছিল হচ্ছে যে আমরা তো অনেক নিউজ চ্যানেলে অনেক নিউজ দেখি, যেগুলো প্রত্যেকটি নিউজ চ্যানেল তাদের বেস্ট দেওয়ার চেষ্টা করে এবং এক্সক্লুসিভ খবরগুলো দেওয়ার চেষ্টা করে। তা আমি এবং আমাদের যে সহকর্মী যারা ছিলেন সেই সময় সিটিজেন জার্নালিজমের সঙ্গে যুক্ত, তারা চেষ্টা করলো তখন যে তাদের এরিয়া থেকে লেটেস্ট খবর, যেটা হয়তো সামহাউ মিডিয়ার কাছেও নেই, কিন্তু আমার কাছে আছে, তোমার কাছে আছে, এবং আমাদের মতো মানুষজনদের কাছে আছে, তারা কেমন আছে, তারা কেমন ভাবে আছে, কেমন ভাবে চলছে, তারা কোন পরিস্থিতিতে এগিয়ে চলছে, সেই আমাদের কথা তো কেউ বলেন না, আমরাই আমাদের কথা বলার জন্য তখন নতুন করে আবার শুরু করলাম সেই খোঁজা। এবং সেখান থেকেই চন্দার ঘটনা সেখান থেকেই উঠে এসছে, এবং তার ঘটনা জানতামও, এবং তার সঙ্গে যোগাযোগ করে আরো বিস্তৃতভাবে কথা বলি। এবং সামহাউ জিগোলোদের নিয়ে খুব কম কথা বলা হয়, যেহেতু তাদেরকে অনেকটা মেইনস্ট্রিমিং এর মধ্যে ফেলে দেওয়া হয়। মানে একটি পুরুষ একটি মহিলার সাথে সম্পর্ক করছে, অনেকটা মেনস্ট্রিমিং রিলেশনশিপের মধ্যে চলে আসে। কিন্তু কেউ জানে না যে সেটাও কিন্তু একটা যৌন প্রবৃত্তি বা একটা যৌন পেশা, এবং সেখানেও সেই মানুষজনগুলোরও কিন্তু খুব খারাপ পরিস্থিতি চলে এসেছিল এই প্যান্ডেমিকের মধ্যে, যেটা আমার চোখে খুব মানে খটকা লেগেছিল। এবং আমার মনে হয়েছিল যে নট অনলি দ্যাট যে এলজিবিটি কমিউনিটি, তার বাইরের অনেক মানুষও আছেন তাদের মধ্যে যারা যৌন পেশায় যুক্ত, বিশেষ করে তাদের যে কি পরিস্থিতি হয়েছিল এই লকডাউনের মধ্যে, বা এখনো পর্যন্ত তারা সার্ভাইভ করে উঠতে পারেননি, সেটাই মেনলি উঠে এসেছিল আমার লেখার মধ্যে। এবং আমার লেখার মধ্যে নট অনলি দ্যাট শুধু যে চান্দার ঘটনা বা সম্রাটের ঘটনা বা আরো অনেকের ঘটনা, আমার মধ্যে সেই সময় বাস্তবিক যে সমাজের যে পরিস্থিতি, আমি কতগুলো জিনিস হাইলাইট করার চেষ্টা করেছি। একটা হচ্ছে, আমি এখনো সেটাকে নিয়ে পাবনের সাথে ভাবছি, কথা বলছি, বা আরো ভবিষ্যতে হয়তো এটা নিয়ে কথা বলবো। একটা হচ্ছে যে ওল্ড এজ পিপল, যারা কমিউনিটি সো কল্ড 45 পার করে গেছে বা 50 পার করে গেছে, সেই কমিউনিটি গুলোকে নিয়ে কিন্তু কেউ ভাবে না, তারা কিন্তু বাতিলের খাতায়। সেটা যৌন পেশার দিক থেকেও বয়সের জন্য তাদেরকে কেউ, ক্ষেত্রেও তাদের কোনো আলাদা করে তাদের জন্য কেউ ভাবে না, রিজার্ভেশন নেই। তারা ভাবে অল্প বয়সীরা ভালো কাজ করতে পারবে, কিন্তু সেই বয়স্ক মানুষজনদের নিয়ে কিন্তু কেউ ভাবে না। এবং সব থেকে বড় কথা হচ্ছে যে আমি দেখেছিলাম যে তথাকথিত সেই সময় যে এলজিবিটি কমিউনিটির জন্য চাকরি বা চাকরি সংস্থানের যে সিস্টেম গুলো রয়েছে, সেই সিস্টেমের মধ্যেও সো কল্ড এলজিবিটি কমিউনিটির খুব হাই লেভেল মানুষজন, যারা প্রচুর একাডেমিক কোয়ালিফিকেশন যাদের খুব হাই এবং যাদের প্রচুর মানে জ্ঞান শিক্ষা রয়েছে, তাদের জন্যই বেশি ভাবা হচ্ছে, কিন্তু বাকি লোকেদের কোনো সুযোগ নেই। কিন্তু হয়তো অনেকেই জানে যে এলজিবিটি কমিউনিটির বহু মানুষরা কিন্তু পড়াশোনার সঠিক সুযোগ পায় না। তারা হয়তো সেক্সুয়াল অ্যাবিউজের শিকার হয় কিংবা ড্রপ আউট হয়। সেই থেকেই মানে আমার এই লেখাগুলো সেই বাস্তবিক দিক থেকেই উঠে আসা, এবং সেখান থেকেই আমি অনেক কিছু যেগুলো আমার মনে হয়েছে যে এগুলো হাইলাইট করে পৌঁছে দেওয়া উচিত, যে প্যান্ডেমিকে কি পরিস্থিতি, এলজিবিটি কমিউনিটি যারা লন্ডন নাচ করতে যাচ্ছে তারা কিরকম ভাবে যৌন নির্যাতনের শিকার এবং পরবর্তীকালে ফিরে আসছে এইচআইভি পজিটিভ হয়ে, তাদের সঙ্গে কিরকম ভাবে যন্ত্রণাদায়ক জীবন তাদের যাপন করতে হচ্ছে। এবং এটাও সব থেকে বড় ব্যাপার হচ্ছে, এটাও একটা সিজনাল ইনকাম, একটা সিজনের পরে তাদের সেই ইনকামটাও থাকে না। সেই মানুষজনদের কথাটাই আমি তুলে ধরার চেষ্টা করেছিলাম। কৌস্তব।
থ্যাংক ইউ সুদীপা। আমি একটা জিনিস বলবো যে সুদীপার আর্টিকেল দুটো যখন আমি প্রথম পড়ি, একটা তো অবভিয়াসলি চ্যালেঞ্জিং ফ্যামিলি ভ্যালুজ, আর একটা এই সম্রাটের গল্পটা। আমরা মেইন স্ট্রিম মিডিয়াতে ভীষণভাবে পড়ছিলাম মাইগ্রেন্ট ওয়ার্কার্স এর কথা, সবাই মাইগ্রেন্ট ওয়ার্কার্স এর কথা বলছিল, এবং আমরা জানি যে একটা সিম্পাথি ন্যারেটিভ তৈরি করা হয়েছিল, আমরা দেখেছিলাম কি হয়েছিল মাইগ্রেন্ট ওয়ার্কার্স এর। কিন্তু আমরা কোনো মেইন স্ট্রিম মিডিয়াতে কোথাও আমরা এটা দেখছিলাম না যে মাইগ্রেন্ট ওয়ার্কার্স এর মধ্যে ট্রান্সজেন্ডার মহিলাদের কথা বলা হচ্ছে। এবং আমরা অনেকেই এটা জানি যে মাইগ্রেন্ট ওয়ার্কারদের মধ্যে একটা কিন্তু সাইজেবল নাম্বার অফ মাইগ্রেন্ট ওয়ার্কার্স আর ট্রান্স উইমেন, তাদের কথা কিন্তু বলা হয়নি। ইনফ্যাক্ট লন্ডা ডান্সারের কথা যে সুদীপা বলছে, লন্ডা ডান্সাররাও কিন্তু মাইগ্রেন্ট ওয়ার্কার্স, কারণ এরা সকলেই বেশিরভাগ ক্ষেত্রে এরা বেশিরভাগই বাংলার লোকজন, পশ্চিমবঙ্গের লোকজন, কলকাতার মানে 13, 14, 15, 16 বছরের ছেলেরা, কতিরা, যাদেরকে এই ধরনের এই প্রফেশনে যারা ইনভলভ আছে, এরা কিন্তু সব কলকাতা থেকে যায়, এবং একটা সিজনাল মানে জাস্ট ওই পার্টিকুলারলি এপ্রিল মে মাস নাগাদ যখন ওদের অনেক বিয়ে ঠিয়ে অন্নপ্রাশন নানান রকম হয়, সেই সময়টাতেই মোস্টলি কাজ পায়, তারপরে আবার একটা সেশন সিজন পুরো বন্ধ থাকে, তারপরে আবার তাদেরকে ডাকা হয়। তো এই যে মাইগ্রেন্ট ওয়ার্কারদের একটা ডিসকোর্স আমরা দেখছিলাম, সেটা একটা মেইন স্ট্রিম ডিসকোর্স। আমি বলছি না, আমি সেটাকে ডিমিন করছি না, তো এই ডিসকোর্সটার খুব ইম্পর্টেন্স একটা ছিল, কারণ আমরা একটা সার্টেন ক্লাসের কথা বলছিলাম যাদের কিচ্ছু ছিল না, আন্ডার প্রিভিলেজড, এবং তাদের জার্নিটা আমরা পুরোটাই দেখেছি। কিন্তু এই পুরো ডিসকোর্সটার মধ্যে যেটা হারিয়ে যাচ্ছিল সেটা হচ্ছে এই যে মাইগ্রেন্ট ওয়ার্কারের যে ট্রান্স আইডেন্টিটিটা এটা পুরো হারিয়ে যাচ্ছিল, এবং সেক্স ওয়ার্কের ক্ষেত্রেও আমরা এই যে যখন দুর্বারের সাথে নানান কনভারসেশন আমাদের ওই সময় হচ্ছিল, আমরা কিন্তু যেগুলোদের কথা একেবারেই বলিনি, কারণ কোথাও একটা গিয়ে কি হয় যে মেল সেক্স ওয়ার্কার, এটা আমি দোষও দিচ্ছি না, বাট এই একটা হেট্রোপেট্রিয়ার্কাল একটা স্ট্রাকচারে আমরা সবাই বিলং করি বলে মেল সেক্স ওয়ার্কারদেরকে না কখনোই ভিকটিমহুড ন্যারেটিভের মধ্যে ঢোকানো হয় না। এবং ভিকটিমহুড ন্যারেটিভের মধ্যে ঢোকানো না হওয়ার কারণে যখন আমরা সেক্স ওয়ার্ক নিয়ে এত কথা বলছি, হ্যাঁ সেক্স ওয়ার্ক বন্ধ হয়ে গেছে, সোশ্যাল ডিস্টেন্সিং মেনটেন করতে হবে, তাহলে ফিজিক্যাল ইন্টিমেসি কি করে হবে, এরকম যে সিচুয়েশন, সেখানে যেগুলোতে নিয়ে আর্টিকেলটা ওয়াজ অ্যাকচুয়ালি কাইন্ড অফ plugging in that hole which was gaping in those mainstream narratives. Thank you Sudeepa, thanks a lot, এবং congratulations to you, তোমার আর্টিকেল গুলো prolifically cited হচ্ছে all over the world. I'm really happy and calling you my friend, and the work that you are doing, it's wonderful. Now, with that, we come to this fascinatingly kind of discursive panel that we had today. All of us have contributed so much, and I believe, Pawan, I'm really happy to be a part of this webzine, and I look forward to this webzine going places. And I believe that as long as Varta runs, we will always have this, the arc of history being written along with it, and we will all be a part of it. Pawan, thank you so much for making me a part of this panel, and it was wonderful listening to all of you. Thank you so much for sharing all this, and what a camaraderie, what a kind of illuminating conversations we had. Thank you very much, Pawan. Over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kaustav. People have been talking about their privilege of being part of Varta, but I want to convey that I am the one who's privileged to have all of you as part of the extended Varta team. And while all of you were speaking, I was also becoming quite emotional. Thankfully, I could have the camera off. But specifically, when Santa was talking, I could remember the point of time when I was I happened to be in Manipur in December 2013, soon after the Supreme Court had recriminalized LGBT people. And there was, in those days, Amanna used to organize a beauty contest for trans women in Manipur. And I remember I was so zapped and I was so touched by the very spontaneous protest that broke out on the stage of that beauty contest. We wrote about that. This was like I was a journalist at one time, and this was like being at the right time, at the right place, with the right people, because I remember that article was titled Beauty, Solidarity and Protest. And the participants, while they were doing the rounds of the stage, they were carrying banners criticizing the Supreme Court's judgment on Section 377. And it was like I was privileged at so many levels, as a queer person, as a reporter, as a writer, as somebody experiencing history again, not a very happy history of being recriminalized, but definitely history. So that was one moment. And when Shampa was speaking, I remember that today, whenever I go to the West Bengal Voluntary Health Association, the training halls in that venue, they are not, I do remember them for a lot of queer pride events that have happened there. But one of the most seminal moments for me, my learning about issues around disability, and also realizing that I am also a person with disabilities. And even if I'm at that point of time, I was physically quite fit, but age-related disability is something which is going to be a part and parcel of all our lives. And I attended a workshop there organized by Shruti Disability Rights Center, and Priya and Shampa was a very important part of that workshop. She was leading the workshop. 2 days or 3 days of that learning was one of the most amazing experiences. And I'm so happy that that I have had this opportunity of carrying articles in Varta on the history being made around disability rights in India. Not many people will get this opportunity. And also the fact is that maybe if I were part of a commercial newspaper or a magazine, probably I would have written about these same issues. But to be able to write about it through a forum like Varta was, I think, 10 times far more special. It wasn't just my job, it was my passion, and it was part of my own reality. So I wasn't writing about it as a reporter who will just file a copy and paste it up in the page and go home. That is not what Varta is. And I think that has all been possible because all of you, all the speakers who are here and those who are not here, there are more than 130 of us who have contributed to Varta. So this is a very, very special occasion. So we have gone beyond time, but I think we can invite some questions from the audience. And also we have a friend from Mizoram, Joseph from Lone Star Society in Mizoram. Joseph, you could also speak on this occasion because you wanted to share something.
I don't have any question, Pawan, but actually for me, I think writing is very important for the queer community because, you know, like we are not mortal, we are not immortal. Okay, we are not mortal, we are immortal. So one day we will die, and then it is only our writing which we can leave as a legacy to the future generation, because it's something that we can leave our idea behind. So writing is very important, but at the same time, our sustainability, financial resources. How do we bring in resources? This is very important. Without money, and within the trans community, it's again very difficult to find volunteer, especially in the context of Manipur. People have their own business, people have their own agenda. At the same time, we also intend to encourage community writers. And recently, I was able to meet a few trans women, Nupi Manbi, who are very fond of writing, and then they publish their writing on like YouTube's and Facebook, and their stories is amazing. Okay, and it's the language are not difficult. It's at a level that I can do the translation. So the only thing is like, how do we encourage these people to write their stories in a very and also how to distribute the story.
I would actually, I will take this occasion to talk about the fact that, you know, we've all been part of the community reporters program, the Varta community reporters program, which is the citizen journalism program that Sudeepa was talking about. And you have also been a very important part of it right from the start. So our focus is to raise resources for a full-fledged program around this, where during the training period, we will have, and it's a very important learning for us, for also from the Economic Inclusion Mentoring Forum, is to have a very good stipend, a monthly stipend for the writers, so that they don't have to worry about their bread and butter, at least for some time, and they can focus on their art of storytelling, art and science of storytelling. And I would say that, you know, today we also, although I am not a very technology friendly person, but I think that we have now other media. We have photography, we have videography, we have TikTok, and we have Reels and Instagram. We have to kind of invest ourselves in using these technologies also for the purpose of storytelling, not just writing literally, although writing actually is, I feel, you know, is an important element in the background for anyone, even somebody who's going to do just a photo feature or a film. They should be able to write out their basic storyline. So our effort is going to be, you know, for later this year, is to go back to the next edition of the Varta Community Reporters Program and raise substantial resources for that, because, you know, once again, if nobody is going to tell our story, we will tell them ourselves, but we will also raise funds for ourselves. So we are going to have campaigns to raise funds for this particular program, and we will be updating everyone about it. Or any other thoughts from the other speakers or Kaustav?
No, basically like, story writing, storytelling, like, I think this is very important in a way. And I think, we need a little more publicity in the sense that it should reach out to more number of people. Nowadays, there is I would say there is an international demand for these local stories. We do have an international demand. One way of doing this could be, like approaching foreign funding bodies. And I believe there will be some, certainly. And the best way to go about this should be, tapping into our resources, our friends who are in these foreign universities, because these projects, because in Jadavpur also at this moment, we are completely kind of deprived of any government funding at this moment. And I don't know for how long this is going to continue. But this is actually, but I think for the funding, we might have to tap people who are working abroad, perhaps, because there's a lot of demand for that. That's and also writing not just to people who we know, but maybe people who we can just look up on the internet. And I've seen so many people are working on this, particularly LGBTQ areas. The stories, particularly what Santa is referring to, I think those stories would have a very ready audience everywhere in the world. But for sustenance, for kind of giving them a sense of livelihood while writing, we need that kind of funding. That is very important, and maybe that could be put through by suggesting projects, or going into collabs with foreign universities. Yeah,
that's a good idea. Thank you, Kaustav. Yeah.
And Pawan, I don't know how to do this, but actually, like I've also found a few like independent publisher. It's not beyond the Webzine format. So why don't we try to establish such thing in Varta, so that we can also collect stories from the community and do the physical publication. And I believe that there will be a lot of demands in the market, because, like I still have two stories. One is the accents and the other one is the fable. It's a love story of two butterfly. So like, like if Varta has that ability, then I will be feeling free to do the editing with the person who I have been familiar with. Okay. So that kind of establishment also requires.
So several of my Varta colleagues are here, including my co-trustees Kaushik and Madhuja. So I hope they are all hearing this suggestion, Santa, that we should move towards Varta becoming a publishing house, perhaps moving beyond the webzine. It definitely is a dream to aspire towards. Thank you for the idea. Shivlal, thank you so much for your message. But if you want to quickly share, there is time. If you want to say anything.
No, Pawan, like my association with Varta began in 2018. I think for a lot of us, there's a lot of personal emotions attached with our work in Varta. It also came to me at a time when I was going through a lot of personal crisis and stuff like that. Writing is something that I always wanted to do, but never took up the pen and sat down to write. So when the opportunity came to me through Pawan, I took it up. Though I'm a very lazy writer and stuff like that, but some of one or two of my writings I'm quite proud of. Some of the issues that got highlighted from Assam. I hope I can in some time I'll be able to contribute more, but I cannot get into something. But yeah, I look forward to a full-time kind of a publishing house or something through Varta. Yeah, thank you so much. And Pawan, I'll also talk to you separately, because I've been talking to the people here. There are actually quite a lot of community members who are willing to write. We have even formed a small WhatsApp group, where we are trying to work on queer literature in Assam. And I have been wanting since a long time, that these people, what I trained on the citizen journalism program, they also should go through a similar training program, so that their writing, the skills get enhanced, because they come with a lot of ideas.
Absolutely, there are so many stories still remaining to be told, and in so many different ways. So we'd love to collaborate and take it forward. Thank you for that. Thank you. All right, so I think we have spent quite a long time today talking about 100 issues of Varta. Thank you, everyone. Any other final thoughts? Or Kudipra, do you have anything to add?
Nothing in particular, but it was quite an interesting discussion for me. I came on board to Varta only last year. So this was a moment where I got introduced to so many of you. And it also gave me so much context about the work that Varta has been doing for so many years. So I just feel glad to be a part of the team at this point and hope I can contribute to the Webzine in the future.
Yes, this is actually so opportune because you're just beginning to write for Varta. So
Yes.
you get a picture of, what has been involved and how you can bring in a fresh perspective.
Absolutely.
So I would also request you to just give a very quick idea to the audience about some of our next events that we have thought of for celebrating 100 issues of Varta.
Yeah, sure. So we will be having a meet at Deshach Cafe on 4th of June. A lot of the members from Varta will be joining us, and we will also be launching our COVID-19 locator on that day, on the 4th of June itself. And there's going to be a short presentation highlighting the kind of work that has been done on the Webzine, the kind of articles we have published. And we will be inviting few of the members who have contributed to the Webzine to say a few words about their journey at Varta and give a few insights about their writing and what they have contributed throughout the process. During July, early July, we have also planned an art workshop where some of our aspirants will be joining us and members from the community, where we will be gathering for different events related to art.
All right, Dr. Veera, thank you. I just want to add that from the art workshop, we are expecting new ideas for publishing posters and bookmarks of Varta. Varta's bookmarks were something that was one of the things that we started, right at the beginning. And although we are a webzine, but we also publish bookmarks. So it's an odd combination, but it's an important combination. If everybody is willing, whoever is willing, if we can put on our video cameras, then we can take a group photograph for this occasion.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, say cheese.
100 issues. All right. Thank you, everyone. Wish you all a very happy weekend, and please read more articles in Varta and also write. I will be chasing all of you as usual for articles and ideas.